color, but it also ties into this next section. So I'm going to save that. I really want to talk to you about audience segmentation. This is extremely important because you may have very different audiences that have different needs when they come to your website. And that's very important to keep in mind. How are each of your different audiences going to use the website? Because you probably have a different subset of goals and objectives and defined outcomes for those different audiences. And probably the easiest example, and the one I like to use a lot, is really that of a bank. If you think about how you go to your bank's website and what you do, you're obviously, for most of us, is you're going there to check your balance and move money from accounts and pay bills and things like that. So you, as a customer of the bank already, have a very defined path that you're going to take. You're probably going to spend less time interacting with the latest CD offers, or the latest incentive for a new checking account, because you already have an account. So it makes a lot of sense to really segment those audiences out. And once you do that, you're able to view those different audiences in analytics. So you're able to view your customers, or even exclude your customers from all your reports, and then get a clear picture of how the people who are not customers in that example are responding to your marketing initiatives, responding to your on-site offers, versus, again, the way a customer might. So I've obviously said this example about customers. There's account holders. There's support requests. You may want to, what I call, tag these different audiences in based on how they interact with the site. People that use your support, that maybe have a problem with a product, or that download information, or customers and account holders, you may want to tag those all differently so that you're able to see how they interact with your website differently and see if the site is really serving their needs. And then, of course, we have prospects. We have different ways that you can segment your prospects based on what type of customers they are. If they're maybe you have products that are suitable for B2B and also B2C. And based on what products they're viewing and where they're pathing in your site, you may want to tag those visitors differently as well.
Another great example here to consider is for those of you who have organizations or websites that are both B2B and B2C focused. I think this audience segmentation, another way to perceive some of the value, is for your B2B market versus your B2C market. And obviously those two audiences have very different needs, but you probably also are providing them with different paths down the website, in addition to different content and different calls to action.
Yeah, great point, and actually leads right into my next slide, which is this is just an example of a real-world example. This is from the Quicken site. Thank you, Intuit. But basically, that they are asking the visitors to the site to self-segment. They've got an option here that says New to Quicken, where you can explore and see how it works. So everybody that goes down that path can be tagged in a particular way. And then, of course, they have a button and a path for people that already use the product and are already familiar with it, that just want to see what's new in this new version. So it's another example. If you're doing any kind of self-segmenting or asking your clients to self-identify or self-segment and follow a particular path, this is a good way that you can kind of tag those users that go down each one, or see how many actually choose both. So to tag your visitors, and again, I like to use tagging, although this is called custom variables, because I like to think of it as like a blog post that might be about many topics. Your visitors are there for, can be interested in many things, and you may want to apply more than one tag to a visitor. So, if you want to use tagging, great. If you want to call it just custom variables or some other kind of identifier, great. But there's some specific things you need to keep in mind. And by the way, when I talk about or we reach any slide, this is a little bit of housekeeping. When we reach any slide that has a report, which this one will have in a minute, and this is a report from Google Analytics, in the top left you'll see kind of a little legend of how you would find this particular report. This is in the audience section under custom and custom variables when you see this. So just keep that in mind as we go to additional slides. So there's a couple things to keep in mind regarding custom variables. First of all, in the standard version of GA, which 99.99% of companies and organizations use, there are 5 slots available. So for you have 5 slots or 5 opportunities to tag people, and that's it. And I think for a lot of people, or most people, that works, and that's enough, and it's effective. If you have a high-volume site and have the need for a bigger, faster processing or more custom variables, there are 50 available in the premium version of Google Analytics, which we really won't talk much about today, but just know that. So you do have 3 different scopes. So you can grab information, for example, like a color of a product or the quantity entered on a particular page, and just save that away for that one page if that's all you're interested in. You just want to know how people selected for that particular product. You can actually also choose session that you want somebody to be tagged for an entire session. And a good example of that is, like, let's say whether somebody is logged in or not. You may want to track that as well. And the last is visitor, and I think this is actually a persistent cookie that gets set when you set a visitor scope. And what happens ultimately is that as someone comes back to the site, they are analytics will realize that this is, for example, a customer. You'd want to use this kind of tagging for customers. You'd want to use the scope so that every time they come back to the site, you're able to catch all of the sessions within analytics and segment them that they are already a customer. So basically, when you do this, it adds these new dimensions of your visitors into Google Analytics. And these dimensions are dimensions typically when you hear that term talked about in Google Analytics, it's a characteristic of your visitor, like what kind of browser they were using, etc. So this is powerful because this gets stored in GA, and this is all segmentable. So as I said before, you can exclude your customers or include your customers in your data analysis. If you're in marketing, which most of you probably are, and you want to really look at just the folks that aren't customers yet, that you haven't converted, then you may want to exclude your customers from that data pool if your site does serve both, and that'll give you a much better idea of how new prospects are reacting to your marketing. So here's an example of that, of just kind of the high-level view of a custom variable, and this is just an example of a way to tag people that are spend more time on your site or look at many articles versus versus 1 or 2 on a blog, let's say, where you can tag people that are just kind of looking around, or if they meet a certain threshold and look at a number of pages, then you can categorize them in a different way. And this, again, is just one example of a way that you could use it. And I think we've already given you several ideas on this. But it's a very flexible and powerful tool. One of the things that we need to keep in mind is that there's a couple different ways to code for custom variables. The first is a modified version of the Google Analytics tracking code, which we call the GATC. So ultimately, if you remember that magic JavaScript from the beginning of the presentation, beginning of the webinar, that collects all this information, that standard script on its own really won't let you tag by page, but you can use a modified version of the Google Analytics tracking code. And we're looking at a typical one here. And then you see in red there's an extra method added to this, and this is the set custom var method, which basically adds that tag for you. And in this case, these numbers, just in case you were curious, number 2 is the slot. The visitor type is something that we've just labeled this as, or that we've used, and in this case, customer. And 1 is the scope, and this is basically is tied to the visitor and sets a cookie for them. So this is one way to do it. This would be placed, for example, behind a gated login or something where you could tag someone as a customer. You knew that only customers could get to. You could also use something like this on important pages if it's important for you to understand if a visitor interacts with something on your website and you want to know maybe the first time they do it, they don't buy, but you know that they're going to come back later because they interacted with this element and then purchase at a later time, and you want to preserve that across session. This is one way to do that.
So just to clarify, for those of you who are new to Google Analytics, because I know we probably have a variety of levels of understanding of the platform and usage of the platform. So for those of you who are fairly new, what you're looking at right here, which was something that Theo had shown on an earlier slide, beginning with the word script and then again to the bottom to the word script, those 7 or 8 lines of code are what comprise the Google Analytics JavaScript. On that third line where you see account, UA, dash, and the X's and the Y's, in your JavaScript on your website, those X's and Y's would be replaced with numbers, and that is your account number. Now, this piece of JavaScript is going to be placed on every single page of your website without the red that Theo is highlighting here. That JavaScript should be on every single page, including if you have a blog on your site, as well as any landing pages that you use for your email marketing, for your paid search marketing, for any type of online marketing campaigns. Now, Theo, just to clarify, for coding for custom variables and that additional line of JavaScript in red that you're highlighting here, that is only to be used on select pages where you want the custom variable to fire.
Right. So in this case, again, if you know that if somebody reaches a particular page, again, maybe behind a login or something like that, or maybe for an e-commerce site, a receipt page, because you want to tag them as a customer that they bought, then this would be placed on that page. And it's also, again, a good way to tag people that you'd like to track across session because they interacted with something important on your website. If it's a video or an online tour or something like that, those are good uses of this type of code. So it could really go anywhere on the on your site, but you want to be very careful about where you're placing this customized version. And also, Danielle, thanks for bringing that up about the XX and YY, because believe it or not, that is something that I see more often than I care to say, is somebody copying and pasting code without putting their own tracking number in there, and that's obviously not going to do anything for you.
Right, and just to piggyback off that, in addition to the X's and Y's would be if you're trying to copy something off of somebody else's site from a coding perspective, they have their own UA number. So UA numbers are unique to each individual company and or website, and so that UA number belongs to you and belongs to the interface in which you log into. If you are not using your own UA number and you're using someone else's, the data collected through that UA number will show up in their interface and login, not yours.
Yeah, please don't do that. So moving on, we just talked about doing it on the page level, but let's say there's something that happens on the page. For example, the one that we used before with a number of items update or color selected, or let's say somebody does a virtual tour. You've got a virtual tour option on every page of your site, and you want to know, if somebody clicks on that, you want to just catch it on that page. Then there is another method that you can use, and that's just by also using that same type of declaration, that same method that we had before that was in the Google Analytics tracking code in that customization that we had on the previous slide. But this can also be added, for example, to an on-click method like an event, like we talked about before, the on-click attribute of an HTML element on the page. The one caveat to that is that if it is something you want to track on that page, this setting a custom variable doesn't actually request that new GIF from the server. Nothing happens on this. And that's the reason you can do it on the page level by modifying your GATC. But in this case, if you want to measure something on the page, we recommend using pretty much a helper function. You want to send an event at the same time. In this case, we're also, with the code I have here, we're also want to track that somebody is using this virtual tour, so we're sending an event for that. But you could use, again, some kind of helper function where instead of interaction, it said helper tag, etc., or something on there, something custom variable, just to get that GIF request to happen, and that's important. So another common problem with custom variables, actually, if you are using them, is that people aren't keeping track of what they're doing, and it's very important that you keep a kind of a matrix of what's going on, and like a slot matrix, so that everybody in the organization understands exactly what's happening, where you're using these 5 slots that you have available, what it is you're tracking, and what the scope of that is. Because it's very easy if you're tracking all 5 of these things in the same index, they would basically overwrite one another. And in some cases, that's okay if you're overriding each other. For example, the session level where you want to know if somebody is logged in or not, if they log in a session. I mean, if somebody first comes and you want to just have a blanket custom variable on every page that they're not logged in, and then once they log in, once they get to that page behind the login, you want to change that to a login state.